So, as far as the instrumental look at play on the playground, it was kind of interesting to see where people felt pressures were coming from. Principal was worried about the parents feeling that their children were safe at school. She was focused on having enough budget for playground supervision. Teachers were thinking about social development and physical health, um, but they did admit that really the adults are out there just to make sure that the kids are safe and to settle arguments about games. They did have a program at the school called PBIS. Basically, the kids would get rewarded for being positive on the playground. And there were specific lessons on how to react if there was a conflict and things like that. There was a behavioral specialist available on campus. So they were really worried about sort of bigger pictures of emotional stability for some of these kids and safety. Um, Recess supervisors had more concerns about the kids themselves not having access to play at home. A lot of the kids didn't get to go to parks, or they didn't have yards at their homes to play in. Most of the kids, they felt, were using electronics as a substitute for being able to be social outside with friends. They were worried about health. They were worried about older ones not getting exercise, but also picking on little ones. And they were worried about getting in trouble with parents for not handling situations the way that the parents thought they should. And they were worried about trying to handle situations in the way that the principals would. They wanted to make the teachers happy. So they sort of felt like they were in the middle of a lot of stress. Uh, Parents were really worried about kids getting hurt. They didn't want the little ones getting hurt by the big ones. They felt like they needed to learn about rules and consequences, that would help them later on in their lives. They talked a lot about junior high and high school kids joining gangs and suicide issues, and that there are other kids in the neighborhood that didn't have guidance from parents, and so they were afraid to let their children play in the neighborhood outside of school hours. So they really saw recess time at school as an important time for their kids to develop social skills because they didn't have the opportunities, or they felt like they didn't have the opportunities in their neighborhoods. So I took these interviews and observations and kind of made a fuzzy chart of what things look like on this triangle. In general, the principal was very focused on institutional issues. She was a little bit worried about things outside of the educational aspect of play. She really didn't have very much focus on the intrinsic value of play. It didn't seem to really be on her radar very much. Teachers were very similar to the principal in their comments. They seemed to be a little bit more aware of the intrinsic value of play. They mentioned things from students' perspectives a little bit more, but honestly, not very much. The recess supervisors, on the other hand, seemed very focused on individual kids and what they were getting out of play and what they liked to do and how they had seen children grow over the years. um, they were focused on what the kids' needs were and what they wanted, um, as well as being concerned with, how well they're doing in class, and, making the parents happy and worried about their futures and things like that too. Parents primarily were really worried about how their kids are going to grow up and be okay in environments outside of school. They were worried about gangs, they were worried about depression, they were worried about physical health, and most of our conversation sort of kept focusing back on these instrumental values of play. So, in general, the school was fairly institutional and a little instrumental, but not very intrinsic, except for those recess supervisors that really didn't get a whole lot of time with the students. So, what I found interesting about these recess supervisors is that they seemed like they were under an awful lot of pressure to try to serve the other adults in the play environment. They were focused on the needs of the teacher, the needs of the principal, the needs of the parents. They saw the needs of the students, but kind of felt like it wasn't their place to advocate for what kids wanted. Um, they are the least paid and least trained people on staff at the school. So they kind of didn't have the confidence to take on administrators and teachers. Many of the recess supervisors, there's a big turnaround in that position. So they change. They'll work for a few months and then they're gone, or they'll work for a year or two and then they're gone. So the kids didn't really have a close relationship with the recess supervisors, and the recess supervisors kind of felt like they didn't know what to do with themselves out on the playground. Most of the verbal interactions had something to do with tie your shoe, or you're going to get hurt, or don't run on the blacktop, or you're going to get hurt, um, because they felt like that's what the principal and the parents and the teachers were expecting them to do. Although they wanted to be able to have different types of interactions, they were nervous about initiating that without any kind of training.